ସାର୍ ନମସ୍କାର। କେହି ପିଲା ଆସିନାହାନ୍ତି, ସେମାନଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ୱେଟ୍ କରିବି ଆସିଲା ପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ ତ। Hello, good afternoon to all. I am Ipli Sivasankar, going to start your class State and Society in Australia. That is your MPSE 12 board. So let's start. So Unit 1, our paper State and Society in Australia. The Unit 1 is Australia, Land and People. So this unit contains topography, the climate, and Australian people, their behavior. These are mentioned in this unit. We're just going to start right now. Okay. In the mid 20th century, Australia was considered to be a land of culture and topographical unity. It is known for its remarkable unity, most of its features, especially when being compared of Europe, with its mosaic of different nationalities erecting barriers against each other. It's only in the recent years that there has been increasing awareness of the changing composition and diversity of the population. Modern Australia and had begun as a penal colony of the British in 1788 with a very small number of free settlers. Over the years, and with the consolidation of settlement along the eastern coast, the rapid expansion of British woolen industry led to the rapid subjugation of its indigenous inhabitants and most of vast expanse of land. Today, the Aboriginal group have been recognized as distinct people, and efforts are made to undo the wrong of the past. Moreover, the increasing inflow of immigrants from small part of the world has resulted in Australia evolving a multicultural nation. So here we can know that how the Aboriginal groups, the immigrants are coming to Australia and Australia becoming the multicultural nation. Australia is located South Africa of Asia, southeast of Asia, the southern himself. It is the world's largest island, sharing no border. It is the most important thing that Australia is sharing no border with any countries, covering the area 7713360 square kilometers. Okay. Australia is divided into six states and three territories. Somehow, it may, if possible, try to remember the six states and three territories Australia had. The six states are New South Wales, Queen Island, Queensland, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia. The three territories are the Australian Capital Territory, Northern Territory, and Jervis Bay Territory. Okay. The focus of this unit, what we need to focus in this unit, will focus the land people of Australia, and it's divided up in different section. The first section deals with the physical feature of the Australian land mass and its different climate system. The second section of Australian people, apart from giving the restricted account of the population profile, attempt to give the students feel of what is like to be an Australian. We have all idea about the Australian cricket, but here we'll know the state, the society, and the political system, and other atmosphere. Let go. Describe the main topography feature of what is the topography of Australia. In this chapter, we try to know that the topography system of Australia and delineate main characteristics of Australian population. What is the Australian population? How they started? What is their background? And try to know about the ethnic, cultural complexity of Australian society, and try to board counters of Australian national identity. The Australian area is mostly of large plains. Uh, area is covered with the mountain chains, um, and lots of, you can say that there is lots of source of coal and oil. A large mountain chain called the Great Divine Range extend along with the eastern coast. Along the northeastern coast of Australia is a Great Barrier Reef, the largest known as coral formation in the world. This chain of reef extends for 2012 kilometers. Australia is also known for fossil content, but most of its current physical features have resulted from recent geographical movement. It is said have caused the board shape of Australia, but most of the details carved by river erosion. Many of Australia river drain inland, while they may be erode their valley near their highlight sources. Their lower courses are filling up with alluvium, and the river often end in Salt Lake, which are dry for most of the time. The Salt Lake of the Ilgram Plateau in Western Australia are the remnant of the drainage pattern that was active before content drift separate Australia from Antarctica. So this part saying about what is Australia area, what is a mountain, how it is covered. The Australian landform of today seems to have resulted from long continued processes in a unique setting, giving rise to typical Australian landscapes, which is the RON provide the physical basis for the distribution and nature of biological and human activity in Australia. Australia then can be divided into three physiographic regions: the Great Western Plateau, the Central Eastern Lowland, and Eastern Highland Belt. Try to remember these three physiographic regions. Once again, I repeat: the Great Western Plateau, the Central Eastern Lowland, and the Eastern Highland Belt, along with marginal depression of various size which have been frequently invaded by the sea. Australia is the lowest, flattered, and a part of Antarctica, the driest of the continent. This fact gives Australia a very distinctive physical geography. So, what is the Great Western Plateau? The Western Plateau consists of almost two-third of entire Australian continent and contains most of its deserts, salt lakes, and mines. It consists of very old rocks, okay, and much of it has existed as a landmass for over 500 million years. Several parts have individual plateau names. In the Perth area, younger rocks along a coastal strip are separated from the rest by the Darling Fault escarpment. The Nullarbor Plain is virtually an uplifted seafloor, a, a limestone plain of Miocene is the absence of mountains, except for some scattered region, is what explains its climate and river system. These rains are locally prominent and included famous monoliths like Ayr Rock and Matola. I know that this chapter is somehow not related to politics or society, as we are the students of social science. We need to know what is the social system, what is the political system. But before going to start the social and political system, we are just trying to brief about the background of land, people, and their and their geographical location. After that, we'll go to that social state and society system. Okay, the still that time, the still that point, we have to continue this one. The Central Eastern Lowlands. The Central Lowland stretch from the Gulf of Carpen Carpentaria through the Great Attian Basin to the Murray-Darling Plains. The Great Australian Basin is filled with the sedimentary rocks which holds what the entire enters into the wetter eastern uplands. It is mostly 800 feet or less in height and covers the western and central part of Queensland and New South Wales together with smaller portion of Northern Territory and South Australia. So the Central Eastern, before we try to know about the Western system, Western Plateau now, it is the Central Eastern Lowland. The Central Eastern Lowland from the Gulf of Carpentria through the Great Austrian Basin to the Murray-Darling Plains. Much of the Central Asian is flat, but there are numerous range and some individuals mountains of which Ullur is the best known. Faulting and folding in this area took place long ago. The area was worn to a plain, and the plain uplifted and then eroded to form the modern range to on today's plain. However, much of the area is only formed by featureless plains. Okay? The last one, the Eastern Highlands. The Eastern Highlands rise greatly from central Australia towards a series of high plateaus, and even the highest part around Mount Koskizo is part of plateau. There are a few younger falls and folds, such as Lake George Fault near Canberra and the Lapstone monocline near Sydney. I hope we know the name as Sydney in Australia. Try to know about the climate system in Australia. Between about 55 and 10 million years ago, Australia drifted across the surface of the Earth as a plate, moving north from a position once adjacent of Antarctica. There have been many changes in the climate of Australia in the past, but oddly, these are not due to changing latitude. Even when Australia was close to the South Pole, the climate was warm and wet. The climate persisted for a long time despite change in latitude. It was probably under this climate that the deep weathered, iron rich profiles that characterize much of Australia were found. Aridity only seems to have set in after Australia reached its present latitude, and the northern part was probably never arid through today a large part of it is. So between about 55 and 10 million years ago, Australia drifted across the surface of Earth, crossed the moving north, and formed a position of once adjacent of Antarctica. The Australian climate is a little bit different, as you know that how it is. Even when Australia was close to the South Pole, the climate was warm and wet. We need to remember the climate was warm and wet. The climate persists of long time despite change in latitude, probably under the climate that deep weather, iron-rich profiles. Okay. Australia's climate results mainly from its size and position relative to the equator and the surrounding seas. That is the important thing that we can know that it is nearly to equator and surrounding the sea. The climate can vary greatly, but generally, Australia is not subject to extremes of weather due to lack of physical feature and the remote location and the remote location in person to other land masses. The climate ranges from the tropical uh, monsoons in the north to temperature in the south. About 40% of Australia is in the tropical region and essentially has only two seasons, a hot wet season and a warm dry season. Hot, so remember that is the hot wet season and warm dry season. More than two-thirds of Australia is covered by desert. Two-third area covered by desert, which account for the most of the population settling on the more temperature coastal area. Therefore, in Australia, There are no extreme temperature mainly because of lack of intense winter cold. All inland stations have hot spell, but there are less frequent on coast. Okay, the hottest month in the southern location range from 65-75 degree Fahrenheit, whereas in the north range is 80 to 85 degree. The hottest part of the continent centers and the marbles are in Western Australia, where temperature had been recorded to soar over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, nearly 40% of the continents relieve below 10 inches of rain per annum, while less 9% receives more than 40 inches. Australia is influenced by the easterly wind, which reduce their water vapor content and movement as they move inland. Thus, heaviest rainfalls occurs in the east coast northwards, particularly in the high coastal range. So remember that heaviest rainfall in east coast northwards, particularly in the high coastal range, where summer monsoon rains are supplemented by the substantial winter falls. Australia's highest annual total is found where exceeding 170 inches. The next wettest area in northwestern Tasmania, which can receive 140 inches of annual rainfall. So annual rainfall, Australia's highest annual rainfall, it is 170 inches, and the second next highest is 140 inches. If you can, you just try to remember this. Yeah, Australian people. Australia is argued to be one of the most multicultural society in the world. We saying that India is multicultural society, but here Australians are also saying that Australia is the most multicultural society in the world, due largely to its current immigrants policies. Immigrants policies. What are the immigrant policies? In order to understand the make of Australian society and its people, we must understand its changing nature of the population. What is the population change? How the populations were changed? We know. To begin with, Australia was not a very diverse society. Settlers were mostly English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. Even at the time of Federation in 1901, the time of Federation, I request to all the students try to remember this years, the time of Federation, 1901, and particularly at that time who were the settlers. Particularly, we can say that English people, Irish people, Scottish, and Welsh. People born in United Kingdom still made up 58% of all Australians who were born overseas. So it is quite, you can know that 58% Australians, those are Australians who are saying that, but they're they born overseas. They are not born in Australia. They are born in overseas. The is made of it is made of about for the 21% of these migrants. The immigration was confined only to white Europeans who were mostly from Western Europe. So most of the Western Europe people were settled in Australia. They even went to the extent of imposition a dictation test in European language to their choice, which the immigrant was expected to pass. This was known as the White Australian policy. So what is White Australian policy? The event went to the extent of imposing a dictation test in a European language of their choice, which the immigrant was expected to pass. European language should be used here. So that is We can say that the white Australian policy. Post World War II, it was clear that an increase in population was called for populate, populate or perish became the slogan of the period, leading to further immigration for, from countries like Poland, Hungary, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Netherlands, Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, Turkey, and other non-European countries. So if you can remember, just remember the slogan: "Populate or perish." Gradually, the discriminatory immigrant policy. So what was the discriminatory migrant policy? Gradually, the discriminatory immigrant policy was dismantled in the early 1970s. The remaining vestiges of the white Australia policy were removed, and the overall size of immigration program increased significantly. So much so, ever since the 1970s, the composition of Australian population has changed dramatically. Previously, there was white people. After that, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Netherlands, Greece, Turkey peoples, non-European countries. Previously, there are only European countries. After that, non-European countries were interested to immigrated here. So much so, ever since the 1970s, the composition of Australian population has changed dramatically. By the year 2000, Australian born overseas were 24% of the population, that is, nearly 1 in 4 Australians were born overseas, and in 1999 to 2000, about a third of all settlers' arrival were born in Asia. The largest growth area in Australia's population in recent times has come from long-term visitors, mainly students from Asia. In the 1970s, tens, tens of thousands of Southeast Asians were admitted to the country mainly as refugees. By 1988, about 40% immigrations of Australia was from Asia, and by 2001, Asians constituted 5.5% of the population. But now, majority of the people being admitted are skilled permanent settlers. Population characteristics, life expectancy and standard of living. The average Australian woman has a life expectancy at birth 80 years, 6 more years than the average Australian man. Most Australians marry in their mid to late 20s. Married couple families, including de facto family members, numbers more than 4 million in 1995. The average married couple has 2 children, and such couple with 2 children remain the most dominant type of the family. Counting for 49% of all families, married couple without children make up 30%, and single parent families make up 13%. Australian women are delaying having children until on average they are in the late 20s. They are also having smaller families with the average size of dropping from the peak of 3.5 babies per woman in 1961 to 1.75 babies in the 1999. The decline in nature growth of the population is promoting the government to consider ways of encouraging women to have children in the indulging announcement that the government would pay about $3,000 per baby born. It's lots, 3,000 per baby. This cannot be happening in India. Aging. One of the characteristics characteristics related to the population, which has also become an important issue of concerning is aging, being an outcome of increased control over childbearing and death. Aging for the last century has generally been welcomed. In the mid 1970s, when one of the Australia's most comprehensive studies was undertaken on population, aging was one concern. In 1975, the report of the National Population Inquiry, the Boris report, okay, students requested to remember this year, the 1975 report of the National Population Inquiry, which is known as the Boris report, only mentioned in passing the body report is related to aging. Okay, only mentioned the passing the aging of the population and did not take it off for consideration in any policy planning. But in recent years, it has become a major concern. This is because as fertility and mortality have both fallen in Australia, the speed and the future level of population aging have increased sharply. The older the population becomes, the less Australians are actively participating in the workforce. Some research analysts argue that Australia should increase its net migration to cope with decline, fertility, and aging of the population. While in the 1980s, it was thought that the immigration sufficiently helped in retaining aging. By the 1990s, it was concluded that immigration was a very inefficient way for reducing the impact of aging. The end of the 1990s has seen revival of this debate, which argued against curtailing immigration with the arguing that if immigration has helped keep Australia younger in the past, it should be able to do so in the future. However, skeptics point out that it was not immigration by the previous higher level of fertility and morality that kept in the population young. Therefore, it is clear that Australia need an appropriate population policy in order to keep Australia young. To make Australia young, there is need updation of the policy, population policy. Urbanization. The country is a heavily urbanized with over 85% of the population living in urban areas and less than 15% of the population living in rural areas. Capital cities have the most concentrated population, but a substantial part of the population lives in towns. The trend towards concentration of the population in the cities has been evident for many years. This is due to certain special feature of the cities. They are part with traveling overseas trade. So if possible, try to remember these few points why people of Australia are interested to stay in cities. They are part with the thriving overseas trade. They have been center of administrative power since the beginning of the European settlement, and they have absorbed a greater part of the secondary industry because of their market and commercial facilities. This trend is aided by low productivity of the entire rural areas, which is discourage decentralization away from the principal zone of intensive farming, particularly in the southeast of continent. So let you know here Australian identity and imagination. The Australian national identity or the Australian type was the creation of the dominant ideas and ideologies of the Australian society. An Australian was given through this ideology a certain character, which encompassed race, religious values, and morality. This invariably given the history of societal evolution in Australia completely overlooked or ignores certain section of the society. the convict origin of Australian society, since most of the early settlers were convict or adventurers from Britain, were considered a shameful past that Australians had to endure even today if they traced their family origin to a convict ancestors. That soon changed, however, with a national outlook which gives credence to the influence of the social environment on the person's character and value rather than hidden gems. Okay, immigrant and multicultural. The image of Anglo Celtic, masculine Australian, and its idea way of life failed to jail with the contemporary diverse multicultural society. But undoubtedly, the version of assimilationist in the character and did not encompasses the various cultural differences. A way of critique by Australian feminists, Aboriginals activities, and different ethnic community leaders has challenged the dominant representation of what it means to be an Australian. The contesting the Australian way of life. They demand the choice of diverse lifestyle, culture, and religion. This, in turn, has led to a multiplicity of Australian identities. Australian Aboriginals population is also very vocal today in establishing their one identity, way of life and culture. It was only in 1967 that they were accorded basic right and citizens. By 1972, they had established their one tent embassy in Canberra protesting their non-recognition. In 1992, they were further rewarded for their effort when the Australian High Court recognized that Australia was not an empty land belonging to no one at the time of colonization and that Australia Aborigines who had right. The number of Aboriginals or Torres Strait Islands people being identified in the National Australian Bureau of Statistics is increasing every year. In contrast to the overall population, rather than aging, the indigenous population is getting progressively younger. This is due to high fertility and mortality rates. Indigenous people continue to suffer poorer wealth and have a lower life expectancy than other Australians. Thus, they are damaging special rights to land and chance to fully participate in their own governance. Lastly, let's sum up this. After that, we have another unit. The main physical feature of the Australian continent make it a landscape rather uniform in nature with a few variations. It is mostly a flat dry land which give it is a distinctive physical geography. Most landforms in Australia are very old, generally measured in many millions of years. Australia can be divided into three physiographic regions. I have already told you. We just remember this. The what are the three physiographic regions: the Great Western Plateau, the Central Eastern Lowlands, and Eastern Highlands Belt, along with marginal depression of various size, which have been frequently embedded by sea. The climate can vary greatly, but generally Australia is not subject to extreme of weather due to lack of physical feature and the remote location in the portion of the other land masses. The climate ranges from tropical monsoon in the north, temperature in the south. About 40% of the Australia is in the tropical region and essential has only two seasons: a hot wet season and a warm dry season. Again, I am saying that it's a hot wet season and a warm dry season. 40% of the continent receives below 10 inches of rain while 9% of the receives 40 inches. Try to understand what is the meaning of this line. 40% of the continent receives below 10 inches of rain, while 9% receives 40 inches. Most of the rainfall in the eastern coast. Eastern coast is the most rainfall area. In keeping with the climate, most of the population in Australia is settled in a coastal region in the east and is living in the urban areas. While most of the population of Australia is still of the European descent and United Kingdom, still the largest overseas born group. As a person of the total overseas born, it is decline. Australia's total population by mid 2004 had reached 20.1 million. The largest growth area in Australia's population in recent times has come from long term visitors, mainly students from Asia. More and more Asians are being admitted as skilled permanent settler migrants. The overall life expectancy of Australian is increasing, and it is a rate of birth decline. This has resulted in a situation where the population of Australia is aging, causing concern to the government. It is being debated whether immigration as a policy to stunt aging is viable. Increasing immigration has led to perceived change in the Australian identity. Apart from immigration of different nationalists, Aboriginals too have become visible in the national and international arena, demanding justice and recognition. To move towards a changing identity is going to be a long process of Australia. So this is Unit 1 completed. Now we are moving towards the second unit. So let's check what is the second unit. Second unit, just a minute. Okay. The unit 2 based on Aboriginals people and the European settlers colonization. So let's start with an making delay. These units consist of Aboriginal traditional society, origins, cultural and lifestyle, colonization, colonial policies on Aboriginals, impact and identities. Okay. Australian historian traced the country's evolution from the period of European colonization. However, in recent years, Aborigines have begun to assert their sense of identity vis-a-vis those that have been imposed upon them by the dominant settler society. This issue of Aboriginals' identity today is closely linked to the political and community awareness and associated territorial and customary rights of the Aboriginals. So, right now, we can say that Aboriginals playing a important and crucial role in Australia. They also need the rights and the political and communal awareness. This current issue of concern regarding the Australian identity will be discussed in the greater details in the one of the subsequent minutes. Okay. What are the objectives of this part? Describing the lifestyle of Australian Aborigines before colonization, and colonial attitude and policies. We'll try to understand the social and political impact of colonial policy. What is colonial policy? What is the social impact? What is the political impact? We'll try to understand in this chapter. Debate on the changing concept of the Australian Aboriginal identity. Okay, without making delay, let's forward the Aboriginal traditional society, how the Aboriginal traditional society was started, how it is, and what is the origins. The literal translation of the word Aborigine is people who were from the beginning. Again, I am repeating this. The literal translation of the word origin is people who were here from the beginning. The origins means they are real original people. Origin. People who were here from the beginning. It is not synonymous as the word indigenous, which means the originated in an area. This implies that the Aborigines who migrated to Australia. Some historians tend to argue that Aborigines came to Australia from Southeast Asia. If this is valid, then it is most unlikely that they came upon Australia by chance. Rather, rather it was a concerted overseas migration, which means that the Aborigines were among the world's first successful sea voyagers. Reason for their immigration to Australia could be many of war, famine, changing sea level, or simply curiosity. The notion of pristine, the notion of pristine natives with a pure culture is artificial one. Many Aborigines had considerable contact with Malaysians and indigenous long before the European colonists arrived in Australia. Aboriginals groups also influenced each other. Waves of change swept the entire continent, changes in tools and implement in social organizations and in ceremonial practice and mythological perspective. Thus, it is argued that Aboriginals culture was dynamic, not static. So Aboriginals came from, we have discussed here that how Aboriginals came from south. Here we can see that as from Southeast Asia. Okay, and we try to remember the meaning of Aborigines. What the meaning is, people who were here from the beginning. What may be the cause why they were migrated? That may be the cause, maybe from war, famine, changing sea level, or simplicity, curiosity, whatever. Okay, we try to remember this as much as possible. Okay, now it is time to know what is the culture and lifestyle. Culture and lifestyle. As the Aborigines occupied the continent, their culture evolved in all its variety. It was a complex and changing society, and most of the available anthropological evidence on the subject coming from Europeans suggests that it was in a continuous process of change. The lifestyle and culture is a changing process. Okay, is anthropologically evidence. It is okay. Anthropologically, it is proved, and they have the evidence. Those are the aborigines. Their culture and lifestyle is a continuous process of change. Also, the fact that there were approximately 3 lakhs Av origins living in 1788 divided into about 500 tribes, each with their own distinct territory, history, dialect, and cultural made it difficult to assess the nature and reason for the change. Okay. We'll try to remember in 1788 there were 3 lakh aborigines approximately, and there are 500 variety of tribes, Those are belongs to distinct territory, history, dialect, and culture made it difficult access the nature and reason of the further change. The engraving and paintings of the Australian Aboriginals found throughout the country have a wide variety of style and subject. According to the belief of the many Aboriginal groups, people have been in Australia since beginning the dreaming since beginning the dreaming. During this period, ancestral scripts came out of the earth and down from the sky to work on the land. They saved the rocks, river, mountains, forest, and deserts. They also create all the people, animals, and plants that were to live in the country and laid down the pattern their lives were to follow. The spirit of the ancestors gave Aboriginal people their laws, custom, and codes of the conduct, and is the source of the songs, dance, design, and rituals that are the basis of Aboriginal religious expression. Okay, this is the we can say that they believe on this. The dreaming, you can say that they believe what their ancestors have told. They believe many Aboriginal groups told about it. Much of the Aboriginals art is bound off with the dreaming stories and the rituals of ceremonies that are performed to maintain the links between people and the world of spirit. Every nations have their one culture, one lifestyle. Like that, Australia have their one culture, one lifestyles. They have some of the belief that how their culture are developed, how their lifestyle is developed, how their ancestors make the rocks, river, mountains, forests, etc. What is their contribution? As we are the students, we should give respect to all nations' culture, lifestyle, and their beliefs. The Australia have also this type of beliefs. It may be we can say that it is a dreaming, but we have to respect it. Sorry, skipped. Okay, fine. Colonization. Prior to European colonization, the Australian Aborigines lived a lifestyle based on the above mentioned dream time beliefs. Okay, that may be a dream time beliefs, but we should give respect it. It was Captain James Cook from England and in his staff, including the botanist Sir Joseph Banks, who later supported settlement in Australia. Cook landed at the Botany Bay on the eastern coast. He charted the region and named the New South Wales. In 1786, the British government announced the intention to establish a penal settlement at Botany Bay on the southeast coast of New South Wales. Mindful of British economic interest and keen as always to save public expenditure, the government planned that Botany Bay would become a self-financing colony through the development of its economy by convict labor. Okay, is some of the examples how they are started. Colonization related matter. Okay. Colonization began with the landing of the shipload of British convicts in the order to to establish a penal colony. We know that how Britishers colonized India. They came India as a trader, as well as we can see here that ship load. Okay, here also the Britishers came to Australia. Britain moved quickly after the American Revolution ended in 1783 to establish its first settlement in Australia, since it would no longer ship British convicts to America. By the mid 80s, Britain had sent more than 150,000 prisoners to two colonies, which framed the early territories of New South Wales and Western Australia. Approximately 20% were women and about one third were Irish, the majority coming from the poor classes of British towns. The Britishers came with 150,000 prisoners. 20% were women and one third were Irish. Okay, most of the people were poorer classes from British town. The colony consists of embittered convict, predatory, gallows, and free immigrants coming from a class of poor urban working classes. They were from the urban factories and slums, showing sign of alienation and seen as inferior to the rest of the society in England. So those were inferior, those were alienated from others, those were suffering in their lives in town society, in this, they are staying in factories, slums area, they have the problem with them, and they came off in Australia. Most were unemployed, looking for job, and victims of the dismal condition prevailing in England. It was only by 1793 that free settlers began moving to Australia. Perhaps it was partly the closeness with with which life was viewed at the time of settlement that shaped by dominant conception of the origins as savages. It was also partly a result of the preconceived notion of the 16th century during the African slave trade that black is dirty and white is pure. There is another conception which viewed Aborigines as noble savages. If possible, try to remember this line that Aborigines as noble savages, suggesting that they were courageous and in perfect harmony with nature. However, the economic and political requirements of the British Crown over this conception, overrode this conception, taking precedence over the policy decided by the Crown. International law, European law, of newly discovered land at the time followed the concept of terra nullius land, which were not being used, inhabited in the European sense, belonged to nobody, and could be freely taken. If the land was being used and the soil tilled, then the right of those using the land had to be recognized. Thus, whereas in North America and New Zealand, treaties were signed with the Aborigines. In Australia, no rights were recognized by the state. So, in Australia, no rights for Aborigines. Overall, the Australian Aborigines went through stages of being conquered through an invention and taking of their lands. It was a clash between the settler who saw land as economic commodity to be used or exploited and bought or sold, and the Aborigines who saw land as a religious symbol and a part of their life to be respected and sought. Between 1980 and 1870, the European frontier settlers moved across southern and eastern part of Australia. This was a result of the decision of British government which wanted to encourage wool product in Australia in order to reduce its wool imports from Germany. Many adopted the new lifestyle. However, the settlers were often con- contemptuous of the origins and separated them from their society, and the people became the fringe dweller of society. Others were removed from their families and placed into institutions. Colonial policy on Aboriginals. So here we discussed how the Aboriginals came to Australia. They came from British town area. They are suffering people. They working worked in a slum area, in industrial area, in factory. After that they came here and settled here. Here means in Australia. Okay. Colonial policy and Aboriginals. Australian colonial history can be said to be divided roughly into four broad periods. Okay. Before the formation of the Federation in 1901, the foundation year from 1788 to 1821, the ascendancy of the pastor, pastoralist from 1820 to 1850, 1850 to 1892, which was the period of gold rush leading to a massive increase in the population, and the period of nationalism and the labor movement from the 1880 to 1900. However, often the Australians regard the gold rush as the watershed which divides their history. Before gold was discovered, colonization developed at a slow and quiet pace, but with its discovery, the pace of life underwent quite a drastic change. We know the value of gold. It is seen that from the early 19th century, the decision of how to treat the Aborigines was in a sense taken. In principle, the official colonial policy throughout the 19th century was to treat the indigenous people as equals, with the intents of eventually converting them to Christianity and European civilization through schools for Aboriginal children. Such act, however, stressing good intention, were frequently supported and always underfinanced. In fact, moving from a policy. So in 19th century, we see that how there may be a chance for the Aboriginals and their family. The perpetual dilemma that they faced was should they be assimilated into settler society or be segregated from it. The failure of the early policy initiatives which favored the assimilation, hundreds racial attitude and gave more credence to the idea of segregation, especially in the late 19th century. The first few decades of the colonization is most places in Australia considered of keeping the blacks out. If you can just remember, in the first few decades of the colonization, Australian considered the keeping the blacks out of pastoral station, a policy which some scholars have argued meant the extermination of the majority of the Aborigines. The reason given for their segregation was the fundamental incompatibility between the developing pastoral capitalist society of the settler and the tribal hunter gatherer society of the indigenous population. Okay. Impact on identity. Apart from Aborigines, the mainland Australia, there are also the Torres Strait Islander who take their name from the strait that separate the Australian mainland at Cape York from the south coast of Papua New Guinea. Although they had long standing contact with Australian Aboriginal people in the south and Malaysian to the north. The Icelanders are the distinct people with their own culture and identity. This has been recognized officially, and the Icelanders in the Torres Strait and the mainland have a distinct voice in national affairs. Prior to the formation of Federation in Australia, various colonies established their own regime to govern the Aborigine. While there were a number of similarities to be found, they differ in important respect. For example, Victoria differentiated between the Aborigines and those they called the half caste. Just try to remember these lines. Victoria differentiated between the Aborigines and those they called the half caste. The Victorian colonial authority introduced a policy forcing Aboriginal natives to live on reserve, whereas the others were forced to merge with the mainstream white society with the whatever modest benefits or support removed. Some Aboriginal people managed to evade this regulation and lived outside the reserve system. However, many families lived on a reserve and mission around the state, including Coranderrek, Lake Tyre, Lake Konda, Pamlingam, um Ramayachuk, and Evansville. The Central Board to watch over interests of the Aborigines, established in 1860, assumed central control of Aboriginal people's lives and living conditions. In 1869, it became the Board for the Protection of Aborigines Board. The board developed policies and expected mission and reserve managers to implement them. It sought to control the work, behavior, and lifestyle of Aboriginal people in Victoria. Mission and reserves were complex environment where clothes and relation and rations can be read as site of curse, control and resistance. However, theoretically, the Victorian Aborigines could vote in the election from 1856, following the adoption of the Victorian Constitution in 1855. Queensland still had a substantial indigenous population, whereas, in comparison, Tasmania's Aborigines had been nearly wiped out by 1847. 10 years later, and a year before Queensland was officially gazetted, a government report observed that Aboriginal tribes in the southern mainland state of Victoria had been largely. Let's sum up. Australian history essentially began with colonization. Yet, we know that the Australian continent has a rich culture, which we have discussed in previous chapter, which goes back many years before colonization. Radiocarbon dating has revealed that Aborigines migrated to Australia at least about 40,000 years ago. Just try to remember, it's 40,000 years ago. What concerns us is to try and understand who the Aborigines were and who they are today. What kind of an impact did colonization have on them? According to the belief of many Aboriginal groups, people have been in Australia since the beginning, the dreaming. Okay, since the beginning, the dreaming. We have already discussed about it. The Aboriginal culture has been dynamic, not static. The Aboriginal culture is dynamic. According to time, it is changed and changed and changed. As the Aborigines occupied the continent, their culture evolved in all its variety. The fact that Australian Aborigines did not cultivate land to grow crops or domestic animals, they have often been portrayed as being backward race. This was the basis on which colonization took place, occupying and taking over land which the colonizers explained was terra nullius or belonging to no one. Overall, the Australian Aborigines went through stages of being conquered through an invention and taking of their lands. However, the settlers were often contemptuous of the Aborigines and separate them from their society, and the people became the fringe dweller of society. The Australian colonial history can be said to be divided roughly into four broad periods: before the formation of the Federation in 1901, the foundation year from 1788 to 1821, the ascendancy of the pastoralists from 1820 to 1850, and 1850 to 1892, which was the period of gold rush leading to a massive increase in the population, and the period of nationalism and the labor movement from the 1880 to 1900. Soon after the establishment of self-governing colonial territories, Aborigines occupied the special position of protecting person to protect them from the evils of settlement. The colonial outlook towards the Aborigines had undergone change. However, while the colonial policy was claimed to be benevolent, osten- ostensibly to save Aborigines from extinction, they have been accused of being more concerned with opening of the frontier to seek Aboriginal labor and to protect their reputation and self-governing status. The colonial policy also had an impact on the formation of Aboriginal identity. Sometime in the 20th century, the separation between Aboriginal tribes seemed to collapse for the settler, and they began to view them as homogeneous using a common term, Aborigines. Instead of names of individual tribes, they have they have been generally grouped in terms of race, class, and culture, which was either primitive or too novel. However, a new view of the Aborigines resulting from Aboriginal assertiveness about identity, decision making, land rights, recognition of their culture is now taking center stage. Okay, here is chapter 2 or unit 2 is end. We are right now go to unit 3. The unit 3 is based on immigrants. Okay, just a minute. Unit 3, immigrants, which is based on making a white Australian. What is the white Australian policy? Interwar, post-war years, and decline of the white Australian policy. What is the multicultural society? White lamb years. Okay, recent immigration in Australian society, and so. Without making delay, let's start the unit 3 with each immigrants. In recent times, Australia has been one of the most popular destination for international migration. Its vast territory of approximately 7.6 million square kilometers, immense resources, and a relatively small population make it very attractive to prospective overseas migrants. A continent in itself, more than half of Australia's land is designated as a arid or semi-arid, yet it is believed that it has many natural advantages and mineral resources, and that its population should continue to expand. Since its racial discriminatory immigration policies of the earlier years abandoned in only in the early 1970s, Australia has admitted increasing number of immigrants from the developing world and has become an important country of permanent settlement for refugees. The most important countries of origin of the immigrants have been United Kingdom, New Zealand and Italy. Of late, however, the origin countries of the immigrants have shifted considerably from Europe to Asia and South Pacific. This is so because the immigrant selection program put under two broad categories of humanitarian and migration non-humanitarian programs. Australian immigrants are numerous enough to be highly visible. Perhaps Israel and Canada and Switzerland have almost as many. Moreover, Australia's immigrants are diverse, although this diversity is recent and it is still a politically charged issue. This unit focused on the quality and kind of immigration who have been reaching Australia and the policies that Australia has followed over the years. What are the objectives of this chapter? Origins and evolution of white Australian policy, changes in the intake of migrant to Australia with decline of white Australia policy, delineate the recent critique outlined by the Australian government for migrant, and give a profile of immigration and challenges in the face in Australia. Okay, it is important making a white Australia. What is white Australia? Australian immigration policy have evolved from mid 19th century itself. Just remember the year century that is mid 19th century, a time when the country was engaged in the task of national building, nation building, and constitution making. This was a period of discover of gold in Australia, 1851, followed by the so-called gold rush, with the opening of Hong Kong as a British port in 1842 and the advent as faster selling ships. Immigration from China became a viable and profitable enterprise on the merchant or broke. Excuse me. Okay. With the opening of Hong Kong as a British port in 1842 and the advent of faster selling safe, immigration from China became a viable and profitable enterprise for merchants or brokers who provided passes to Chinese labor in return for a agreement requiring the immigrant to work for a low fixed wage or to work regular repayment for both loan and interest. Like the other gold seekers, in the primary motive for the Chinese immigrants was profit, but the immigrant families returned back to the China. So many Chinese returned to their homeland without serious considering adjusting themselves to the local social environs in Australia. The professed attitude of the white degrees towards the Chinese was far from being congenial. Ignorant of Chinese history, customs, and way of life, they regarded the Chinese as evil, dangerous, and as a yellow peril that would stain the white country of the Pacific. It was widely believed that the Chinese would be bearers of the disease like smallpox, cholera, and leprosy. The thrifty, hardworking, and the orderly nature of the Chinese immigrants was ignored, and the number of Chinese immigrants increased. It became an overriding factor in the adoption of discriminatory immigration policy in Australia. Now, what is white Australia policy? There are distinct phases in the evolution of the white Australian policy. Certain restrictive action against Chinese immigrants in the 1950s and 1860s by individual colonies, an attempt at concentrate restrictive action by all the colonies in 1980s, adoption of uniform restrictive action in 1988, and the official adoption of the white Australian policy in 1901. In the 1890s, the major issue and vital concern in the formation of the federal union was what kind of country Australia should be. So it is discussed at the time of 1890s what kind of Australia should be. The colonies described the federation to be shaped according what was based in their British inheritance, and this led to the idea that Australia should remain white and homogeneous that will benefited to the British people. The Chinese were already being looked at with suspicion and distrust. At a point of time, it was even felt that the Chinese immigrants were perhaps a ploy on the part of the Chinese government to establish a colony in northern Australia. As Australia became a center to the Europe and Asiatic activity, it was felt that the Australian people should consider what they already what they already had and safeguards their future development by these immigrants from India and Japan too had begun to arrive in the Australian colonies, it was increasingly felt that it would be wise to exclude non-white immigrants from the very beginning, especially from a part of the world inhabited by the people of aliens region, social customs and diseases. The premium of New South Wales in 1896 even made a statement so that effect in the legislature that it would be more human legally stop immigrants of the color races rather than have them legally come in, which in turn led later on to a lot of decisions and even bloodshed by 1901 Australia and more than 4,000 immigrants from India and Ceylon as well as a few from Japan, Syria and Afghanistan, but a few from India and Ceylon were British subjected, but even these were excluded. Interwar post-war years assimilation and integration. During the interwar years, the major aim was to wow and attract British immigrants. Even the small number of immigrants from Italy, Greece, Malta, Yugoslavia, and a few European countries that were admitted to Australia caused hostility and alarm within the country. The Commonwealth government accepted responsibility for migrant selection and took over control from the states of all operation in the United Kingdom. Immigration to Australia and declined during the First World War, but not as much as it did during the Second World Wars. During the economic depression of the 1930s, Australia was very hard hit with the underdeveloped industrial sector and its heavily reliance on import of manufactured and export of grain and wools. Unemployment reached very high level. Thus, no one felt secure enough to allow to even propose a non-discriminatory policy or even any immigration at all. The Second World War also posed a great threat to Australia's security following the invention of China in 1937. Japan had proclaimed a plan for a greater East Australia co-prosperity sphere and signed a military pact with Germany and Italy. The Japanese occupation of Timor Island and its landing on the coast of New Guinea brought them very close to Australia. Under these critical circumstances, Australia felt that for its security it had to increase its population. Although Caldwell, appointed as First Minister of Immigration, announced a program of immigration designed to increase the population by 1% per annum with the aim of bringing in immigrants of British and European origins in the ratio of 10 to 1. However, this proved to be unrealistic and many displaced Europeans were admitted. This led to major change in the Australian immigration. Decline of the White Australia policy. In 1970s, the Labour government led to Bob Whitlam was elected to power. Whitlam's major concern was foreign affairs and Australia's image abroad. He was of the view that being a predominantly European nation, Australia could not afford the stigma of racialism. In speech delivered in January 1972, Dr. A. J. Forbes, Minister of Immigration in the McMahon government, attacked the Australian Labor Party immigration policies and stressed that what Australia required was a homogeneous society without any permanent minorities. In 1969, under the John Gorton then Prime Minister, one of the issues that had gained prominence was that a assisted passage of non-European of British citizenship. Only British migrants selected for assist passage were given assistance. Not all British citizens were eligible for assistance, but there were a number of British citizens of West Indians and Asians origins that were denied assist passes. Victoria's State Minister of Immigration even made a statement to the effect that 99% of all people with dark blood were deliberately rejected by Australia. This discrimination did not last much longer, with the Liberal Nation counterpart coalition losing election in December 1972. The Australian Labor Party, who had been a supporter of the white Australian policy for a long time. But by 1971, the ALP, Australian Labor Party, had decided to go for non-discrimination, meaning thereby a universal immigration policy applicable uniformly to all and removal of all traces of preference were the British. But along with this major change, there would be a reduction in the overall intake of the migration to Australia along with changes in the selection procedure, placing more emphasis on the family reunion and less on deliberate government recruitment and qualified migrants. This means despite a non-discriminatory migration policy. Okay. Recent immigration. So anyone from any country can apply to migrate to Australia, regardless of their ethnic origin, gender, race, or religion. Migration is dependent on the applicant's ability to meet the specific migration and criteria, which are identified and related to Australia's national interests and needs. Since late 1990s emphasis in on the stream of skilled migrant at the planning level, the government has set the target to admitting at least 58% of the new migrants from the skilled stream. The total migration intake in any one financial year is made up by adding together the migration and the humanitarian program. Immigration are admitted under two board categories: migration, migrant program, and humanitarian program. The migrant program consists of family migrant, skilled migrant, and specific eligible migrant. Try to remember this: family migrant, skilled migrant, specific eligible migrant. Family migrants are those being sponsored by the immediate family members who were already Australian citizens and permanent resident. These migrants do not require a point test. The skilled migrant are those who have specific skill and fulfill the requirement of having the skill and would be suited to Australia's current needs. Immigrants in Australian society, we can see the immigration demography, major source of country. By July 2001 to 2000, June 2002, settlers arrived by the country by birth. Okay. from how it is increased in New Zealand from what are the percentage 17.6, United Kingdom 9.8, China 7.5, South Africa 6.4, India 5.7, Indonesia 4.7, Philippines 3.2, and Yugoslavia 2.3, Sri Lanka 2.3, Malaysia 2.2. These are the sources we derived it from the government of Australia. There is no again saying that Australia is today a country of immigrant drawn from different parts of the world, and like the United States and Canada, it is recognized as a multicultural settler society. It is in the backdrop of its present demographic profile. We examined in this unit that some length how this transformation came about. Admittedly, when the six colonies joined to evolve what came to known as the Commonwealth of Australia, at the turn of the last centuries, it was predominantly a country of white Australians. One of the very first laws passed by the Australian Federation, Immigration Restriction Act 1901, was restrictive in nature and content, allowing only the people of Britain to enter as immigrant at least for the next 5 decades. Australia maintain its so-called white Australia policy. Several factors, including importantly the irrational fear and the highlighted anxieties of large-scale migration from Asia, along with the early settlers' desire that Australia should remain as land to settle only for the British, were the overriders factors what led to White Australia policy under the threat of Japanese invasion during the Second World War. Australia realized its need for a larger population for its own security. Even then, the effort still was a get in more British immigrant. But when it proved infeasible, Australia relent by admitting displaced Europeans in the hope that they would assimilate into predominantly white Australia. Ever since, the influx of immigrants of different nationalities, identities, including non-European in Australia, eventually paved the way for the multicultural Australia. The successive government, beginning from 1972, revised further the immigration policy. In the process, non-discriminatory elements of its parts policy were gradually removed, reflecting a new universal immigration policy promoting multiculturalism. The unit 3 is over right now. We're looking forward the unit 4, identity and citizenship. Okay. So in this unit, we're going to discuss about the identity and discourse of democratic policies, that is equality, identity, and the liberal communitarian debate, politics of recognition, identity and citizenship of Australia, political representation, and participation of ethnic and racial minorities. Right now, we came to the our stand as we all are the students of social science. Um, Here we feel comfortable. It is not related to this chapter is not related to aboriginals. It is not related to mountain, lakes, land, people, but particularly the social system. Some I think from here to onwards, from this class or after another class, we discuss on social system and the political system, which is comfortable to us, for me as well as to you who is listening to this. Okay. Thank you to all. Still, you are in still listening to this in the class. I hope This class was recorded. When you will come, you think that the unity 1, 2, 3 is not comfortable. It's maybe somehow too boring to you. But I assure to you that from here to onwards, we will feel comfortable and will enjoy the classes um, onwards. Okay. So identity and citizenship. Let's start this. How do people belonging to diverse persuasions and affiliation came to live together in a priority? And what are the norms and regulate such a political project? Whenever there is a diversity, there would be a ethnic and cultural minorities and majorities. What is the status, the politic grants and minorities? The board answer that the only basis upon which people belonging to diverse persuasion can live together with some amount of civility in a deep divided society is in general the recognition of pluralism, and in particular the institutionalization of minority rights. It is in the pluralist political ambience, and the identity of citizens can be guaranteed. Keeping this perspective in the focus in this unit, an attempt made examining the length and issue regarding the identity and citizenship that surface in multicultural society, and offer some insight of Australia. Here we're going to discuss about the identity discourse, democratic polity, what is the mean of political recognition, and the racial differences Australian society, and how minority are politically represented in Australia. Okay, so before going to the class, just I want to say that this chapter is consist of identity and citizenship. The how we will recognize two different groups and their identification. Then there may be the minor group, where the different culture group. How we give respect to multicultural group. How they can gain the citizenship right, the citizenship in Australia. What are the norms and conditions and whatever we're going to start now. The identity discourse in democratic polity. In democracy, one need to ask what are the most fundamental norms and regulatory transparent within the society. In other words, there is a politically consist of the codes of the regulate relationship between the various segments of population within particular segment. When you are saying about the matter of the democratic system, then definitely there must be a view and the representation of different culture, different varieties of people. They may be the they may be the minority people, they may be the any backward people. They must have the rights for that to maintain, to make them identical, to make their identification, to make their citizenship. It is definitely need to discuss about the equality and identity. Equality and identity. Okay. Spurs have identified various such basis norms, but nothing seems to be more fundamental or superior to the norm of equality. Definitely, I am definitely supporting to the statement that each and everyone in every nation or in every geographical location in all over the world, there must be use the term of equality. We cannot ignore the term. No, if equality is a superior term in anything else. There are various reasons why equality can be should be taken as a prerequisite. There can be hopefully no argument against the idea of human equality in present times. Definitely, there is nothing important than equality. And we are saying the human equality. If a black people, it a fair people, with the Asian people all over the world, there must be maintained as equality. The idea of equality is morally so strong that no one can make no criticism of it. The idea of equality is very strong thing, so much strong thing. We cannot say that someone belongs to the different countries, someone color is different, someone gender is different. We cannot maintain the equality. It is cannot be in this 21st century. We are strongly supporting the system of equality. Beside all other norms such as freedom, participation, tolerance, and democracy, are it can be argued first and foremost based on presumptions of human equality. From the perspective of equality, we can evaluate relationship between the caste, religion, groups, and social classes, and all within each caste, religion, community, and social classes, so as to know the desirability or the understandability of the relationship Besides, the idea of equality also enable us to examine social relationship within the community. So different community must have the system of equality, so that every group, every community, every relationship will enjoy all type of freedom, all type of rights, all type of comfortness in the society. So equality must be maintained. Further, it is one of the ground of equality that we consider the idea of permanent majority rule. There may be majority bulk, but we cannot ignore the minority rights, the minority view. We must give respect to minority views as well as we maintain the majority rule. What is the minority view? We have to respect the minority view. Or the majoritarian as against democracy and public ethnic protection of minority is considered essential of survival of the democracy itself. Yes, if it's democracy, that means we have to give respect to the minorities view. We cannot ignore minority views. We cannot torture them. We majority who have the government, they have the majority opinion, but if it is democracy, we cannot ignore the minority view. Okay, so it is, if we are giving to power to the minority view, that means we are giving respect to equality. If you are giving respect to the majority people's view, we have to give respect to the minority people's view. That here we can say that that is based on equality. Okay, it is those on grounds of equality that excuse me, sorry. It is thus on the grounds of equality that we are consider protection of ethnic and cultural minorities as essential in a democratic setup. Warding off the dangers of majoritarianism and protection of minority rights have thus become essential features of contemporary democratic discourse. As some scholars argue, unless we work out the resolution of the issue, minority rights, we may render cultural minorities vulnerable significant injustice at the hands of the majority, and it is a process of exaggerated ethno-cultural conflict. I have already told you equality in simple line. I am saying that in simple line equality is much more necessary. In we are discussing equality is much more necessary. If it is the matter of identity, if it's a matter of citizenship, there must be equality must be presented. I am again saying that if it is a majoritarian rule, and if the majoritarian rule it's a democratic system, we cannot ignore the term of equality. We have to give respect to the term of equality. As for that, we have to give respect to the minority view. Here the minority views are much more important. If we are giving respect to the minority view, then can say that we are maintain right way of equality. Liberal communitarian debate. So, what are the liberal and communitarian debate? Before going to the matter of this chapter, I try to give you just few idea about what is the meaning of liberal and what is the meaning of communitarian. The liberal are the supporter, the group of people, those are supporting to the individual's right, freedom, and individuals all type of freedom, rights, and so ever. They saying that individual is a conscious people. Individual has the sense. He can say that what is right and what is wrong. The power should be given to the individuals. They are supporting the individuals because individuals know that what is good for him, what is not good for him. But whereas commentarian is not supporting to that. Commentarian is saying that individual interests are always selfish interest. Individuals what's need, it is always said that he thinking always for himself, and for his family, and not to the society. Whereas communitarian interests are common interest, and that interest may be held to the society, and that interest may be held to the people, and it is not a selfish interest. So these are the common idea between liberal and communitarian. Liberal supporting to individuals, whereas communitarian supporting to community. Several important political implications flow from these formulation. First, the state should neutral towards the competing conception of the good. Secondary, political community is led together by impersonal bonds and a mutual agreement dictated by the contract that in this itself does not reflect any system of constructive attachment. System of right and liberties come to the occupying lexical priority over competing conception of the good. In some, the liberal individualist view, those are liberal, they are individualist view, neither the affirmative community on the individual nor the person attachment to the community enter political calculation. It was precisely this argument that individuals can be seen as detached from their community and history that became the focus of criticism of liberal individualism. Communitarian had asked who is the individual who proceeded to chart out political arrangements without any knowledge of who is he and without being constituted by the prior notion of good. Thus, communitarian came to question each and every assumptions of the liberal individualist. Communitarian argued that there is nothing like unencraved individual. Rather, human being acquire their thick conception of the good from their community. This conception shaping and preventing beliefs, actions, and commitments of the members allow moral point of view as opposed to the claims of the transcendental universal reason of liberal individualist. Communitarian proposed that firstly self-embodiment. So, in brief, in short, I can say that here the communitarian saying that the individual is not experienced, whereas the community is much more experienced. So, when the individual has no idea about the society, the community has the much more idea about the society. We cannot give importance to the individual according to communitarian. We cannot give importance to the individual, but we can give importance to the community or society. The community or society have the much more experience, and they have what they are doing, it is only for the community and not for the any particular individual. But when individuals think, when an individual demand, its demands for is only for the personal, it is the selfish. But when communitarian demands, it is not the selfish, it is not the personal, it is to all. Okay, now we are going to the point about the politics of recognition. What is the politics of recognition? Politics of recognition can be create all sort of illiberal and undemocratic effects. Politics of recognition, that means we have to recognize who are the, we have to recognize them, who are the identicals, who are the citizens, who are the not the citizens. This is for this point saying that political organization, without the recognition no one can be called as a citizenship. So to make a citizenship there is much more need the concept of politics of recognition. Okay, certainly achieving all these reality has not provided easily, but okay, in our society we can say that the varieties groups, we have previously discussed that in Australia there are many people that saying there are many culture, the many religion, the many different peoples are saying staying here. That means what it's giving, it's giving the idea of multiculturalism. That means multiculture, multiple cultures are staying in Australia. So giving recognition to them in a political level is also the part of the Australian politics. If multiculturalism is in the crisis today, it is for no other reason than that fact the Australian Liberal Democratic have so far been essentially symbolic and rhetoric and rhetorical in their commitment towards building multicultural democracy admitted needs. So, what is the multicultural democracy's points? First element contained basic cultural liberties listed in Human Rights Convention, protecting against the discrimination on ethnic, racial, and religious ground. In religious ground, in ethnical ground, in racial ground, there should be a protection against discrimination, as well as positive minority rights to exemptions, recognition, support, representation, and autonomy. All such rights are considered necessary to guard against majority preference. They protest autonomous individual and vulnerable minorities against the tyranny of the majority. That is always a potential danger in the democratic regime. Constitutionally, enforcement of right also protect individual liberty in inter community context. Yet multiculturalism is not about the displaying the rights of the minorities. It is also about the designing the institutions and implementing the policies that allow cultural diversities to flourish and conflicting claiming to coexist peacefully. These are area of policy making in which minorities have a claim of involved that will generally to decided by representation of the parliamentary majorities. So multiculturalism says that there should be give respect to all type of group. It is not the only minority. We give respect to the minority as well as the majority and the different people. They must have their opinion. They must have their rights. They must have their citizenship. Democratic multiculturalism polities needs policies that promote common civil identities within the diverse society. There may be a diverse society, different type of society, but how we can stay peacefully with supporting to each other, which where we can give respect to each other. There need of much more policies. So when we make good policies for the different all people, then we can stay happily in the society. Multiculturalism saying that identity and citizenship in Australia. Now we came to the direct point what eventually saying that about the identity and citizenship policies what I've done. Within the culturally diverse society, the challenges of building democratic politics involves two seemingly contradictory principles. The principles of universalism, it means that principles of universalism, it means that one should be blind into the ethnic, racial, and differences among citizenship. Rights and obligations are given to individuals irrespective of race, color, caste, religion, and gender, etc. This became a civic identities. And those who enjoy the rights of citizenship are called the examples of Australian, Canadians, and Indians. The principles of difference, which means the recognition of valuing the distinct ethnic, racial, and other identities. Liberal theorists now recognizes that group or community identities cannot be either negated or denied. It involves the recognition of the distinct collective and group rights. So here we are discussing about the group rights, how it can be maintained. Political representation and participation of ethnic and racial minorities. Again, I'm saying about the same thing that then there should not be any type of negation. There should not be any type of neglection of any type of people. All should be participate in the decision making portion in a they must have the political representation. They every the participation of every ethnic and every racial minorities. The historical pattern of the lack of representation in the under representation of visible ethnic group persist in the political parties and legislature to the present times. Women from visible ethnic minorities and racial groups face even more stupendous hurdles in the political representation. As for the Aboriginals, their absence in even more glaring than all else, and the protect prospect of the Aboriginal woman getting into a parliamentary or getting a cabinet position are almost nil. In increased ethnic racial diversity of Australia and increase in the presence of women in the Australia Parliament do not get reflected in the formation of cabinet, which remains dominated by Anglo-Celtic white males. In some, we can say that since the 1970s, multiculturalism had been added to the kaleidoscope of ethnic policies as a means of accommodation the symbolic aspirants of non-British communities. In 1980s, there are consent moves of provide multiculturalism with legislative and institutional basis. However, its regressive immigrant policies, the law, budget, and overall symbolic nature of multiculturalism and the rise of anti-immigration and white supremacistic political party and the movement have amplified the crisis in the multicultural discourse of Australia. Beside the Liberal National Coalition has its own view of the restrictive immigration policy. A number of surveys carried out the recent years show that there is an increased popular opinion in favor of returning of the white Australia immigration policy and abandon in multiculturalism. Australia is a multicultural society and will increasingly become even more diverse. It is adapting some with reversal the politics of differences, ethnic and racial discriminations, which deprive visible minorities. Equal rights to full recognition as Australia citizens is a reminder that individuals are institutions continue to view ethnic and racial distinction as a reason to deprive people of their universal rights. Okay, the Australia going is increasing its varieties, diversities in multiculturalism. So there is need of different political system, different political policies which can help them. That political policies should be support to the multicultural ideas, where the where the minority will get benefited, well the majority will get benefited. All can be stay peacefully coexist. They can give their opinion, they can participate in politics. They must have the presentation, all group, all ethnic, that will help them. The challenges posed by the ethno-cultural and racial diversity to the Australian state and society as a whole is greater than the challenges of finding a balance between the contradictory principles of universalism, which treats all citizens equally regardless of differences and difference, which respect the promotes the collective rights. Um, Currently there are different collective interest which correspond to the ethnic racial division. Aboriginal people, Chinese, Tamils, Arabs, each felt to its one sense of the collective origins, injustice, and destiny, and each vying for protecting and enhancement through diverse political strategy and state instrument. Okay, thank you. This chapter is over. Today class is over. Another in 6th, I think. Uh, on 6th April, we have another class where we'll start. In that class, we are going to start constitutional development, a historical perspective. I think that will be interesting class. In this first class, we discussed about some of the background, but in the next class, that is starting from the unit one, that is purely based on political system, that is the constitutional development and other things. I think that will be very interesting. Stay tuned and come to the class. Thank you. Thank you to all.